up, we are talking about the financial model, which is critical as you are going through the raising capital process. And it's also, I know when Eric was talking about that deal room, you have to have your financial documents ready, prepared, and probably reviewed by a couple of other trusted advisors. So with us today is Tej, and he is a startup advocate for Des Moines. He is co-founded, right, Plains Angels, but now leads Plains Angels, which is actually an angel network here in Central Iowa, Angel Investor Network. His full-time job is actually at Principal Financial, but prior to all that even, he's been a founding member of GIA, which I know we have the whole cohort in here of Global Insurance Accelerator, so he helped be kind of that catalyst to bring that accelerator to Des Moines and create it. But also has a whole technology background in starting his own company. So with that, I will let Tej get started.
Thank you.
And then there's a quick one.
Perfect.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for being here and listening. This particular deck is a revision, an abbreviated version, if you would, from something that Mike and I worked on as I was looking at the spreadsheet in 2012. So it's old in many ways. You're welcome to any and all of these materials. Mike, who originally created this, has retired, but he has graciously offered access to this model, the spreadsheet underlying it, the documentation underlying it, for anybody who needs it. The site that he used to have it on is now decommissioned, but my email will be up here in a moment or two. Feel free to send me a message. I'll gladly send you the model as it sits today. Now, the one I have to share is a complex one for companies that are already well on their way of maturity. I will gladly include a very basic version, the 2012 version, 1.0. That's a little bit simpler if you're just in the starting phase. So offers out there, my email will be up in a second. Please feel free to send me that message. The goal this morning is to talk about what a financial model is. Why should we even have one? And then what does it really mean to an investor, whether it's the VentureNet panel, an angel investor, or even a formal fund like ISA Ventures or its cohorts. So what do people look like in that model and why? I'm happy to answer any questions. You can take me in whichever direction. I have taken this particular deck and skewed it toward young companies, so mostly in the startup phase. But if your questions go toward more mature companies, I'm happy to go in that direction. So basics of accounting, basics of financials. What are these three statements? Many people confuse a financial model with a P&L, a cash flow statement, or a balance sheet. It's none of those, but they are complementary to each other. So what are these statements? I'll just breeze through them. If you have any questions, please just raise your hand. These statements, however, being accounting statements, they are facts. Financial models are dreams, aspirations, hallucinations. Accounting statements are facts. So you have to separate the two. One can feed the other, but one cannot be the other. Accounting statements look back. Models look forward. Models, even though we spend a lot of time on them, they're always wrong. Virtually 100% of what you put in a model will be wrong. It is almost always something that you continue working on. Just like you're dreaming about your business continuously, you should be updating that model continuously. In my current role, I'm helping build a brand new business within a Fortune 200 global company. I have a model. We update that model on a weekly basis to see, are we dreaming or hallucinating on the right path or the wrong path? So there are lots of posts about models. Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures and Brad Feld of Foundry Group have written extensively about these things. If you aren't following these two writers, you should. Fred Wilson more so even because he writes from a financial analyst perspective. This is the guy behind startups like Twitter and Etsy. There's some good funding behind it, and there's good logic behind it that they share freely, daily. So why do you need them? You need a model if you want to make money. The model is about money, ultimately. It will help you think through when and how you will need cash to thrive, to succeed, to even function. It'll help you find things like long sales cycles and what to do with money or absence of money in that long sales cycle. It'll help you stage when you should bring employees on to your company. It'll even help you think about those valleys of death that startups go through where cash goes to the negative. You can't spend negative cash, right? So you're identifying where those negative troughs are and then trying to avoid them. That's what a model lets you do. So going back to that P&L, at a startup phase, literally at the very beginning, this is not a venture net, this is not an ISA Ventures phase, this is when you have just created the company. A P&L might just look something small. What is going to be your revenue? What will be the cost of revenue? How will you sell to get that revenue? What will be your operating expenses, like domain name, like parking fees, whatever the case may be. P&L will be tiny. As you grow the company 2, 3, 4, 10 years from now, P&L could be multiple pages long. Prepare to grow. Let your financial projection or the financial plan be prepared to grow. So P&L is just where's money coming in, where is it going? Simple as that, pluses and minuses. For a P&L, however, you need to think about why the revenue will come. Where will it come from? So you have to start creating assumptions. What is your product going to be worth in the market? So this is not just what you think the product should sell for. It's what the customers are likely to pay for this product. That question cannot be answered by you alone. Market will tell you what certain products are worth. If you are going out for a domain, you know a domain is worth somewhere between 10 and $100 a year, depending on the services you buy. They skew toward 10. So if you're creating a domain-related product and you're pricing it at $50, there should be reasons behind that $40 delta from the market price. What is that assumption that drove you to that $50 price? So you're going to have to be realistic. You're going to have to project your revenue for the next 12 to 18 months. Mallory, right? I think Mallory said something about looking back 3 years and looking forward 3. In a startup phase, you may not even be able to look forward 9 months. When angel investors invest, they are typically looking for that 3, 6, or 9 month view of the world. Can you think that far? What will revenue look like in those early phases? Now, looking forward, a 3-year forecast is generally pretty sufficient. But if you're a new company, stay at 1 year, because anything beyond that is a hallucination. It will 100% be wrong. This is not, again, this is not a projection of financials. Investors aren't holding your feet to the fire for these numbers because they already know that they're wrong. What they want to know is, how are you aspiring to grow this business? And are you realistic? Are you grounded in creating those aspirations? That way the investors can help guide you with guardrails rather than reel you in with a long fishing line. What they want to do is get to a realistic business model. A hockey stick has to be supported. A hockey stick revenue has to be supported by hockey stick aspirations that are realistic. Now, P&L talked about money coming in, money going out. But P&L is not cash flow. Money comes in at a certain phase, right? So we send a bill, a customer pays back immediately to somewhere in the 0 to 60-day range. Revenue still remains the full revenue that you built. But cash flow says that in those 0 to 60 days, your available cash is going to go down towards 0. So a cash flow statement becomes a second part of the financial model saying, how will I survive? How, especially in Iowa, how will I live indoors, eat solid food while I'm waiting for the invoice to get paid? That's what a cash flow statement ultimately gives you. This is pretty basic stuff, but I'll get now to the balance sheet. This is what the investor is interested in. This is where an investor is saying, in addition to the revenue, what happens to the business itself, the assets? Those assets are your goodwill. Those assets are your bank account. Those assets are your loans on the book. They could be grants. They are likely intellectual property you're creating. So this statement creates that future value of the business to say, will the investors and the founding team someday be able to sell this business for more money than we put in? Ultimately create a profit. This, even though the acronym for balance sheet goes to BS, this is not BS. This is the real thing. Gotta stay real to this one. This is the place where, as a mentor, I run into most trouble with startups. Startups say, I will outsource my accounting work to somebody else. You can't. At a point, you can outsource your accounting work to a professional. But unless you, as the CEO or the founding team, know your numbers, you don't know your company. You're going to have to know where money comes in, why it comes in, how you affect its flow into the company, how you affect its flow out of the company, what creates the multiples of value. So these numbers are material. They matter to you, they matter to your employees, they matter to the employees' families who are relying on the paycheck. You should be able to answer questions about the numbers in your business. Listen to any public company quarterly earnings report. The CEO, who has probably never seen a revenue check or never seen the invoice go out from a public company, has to answer to the street's questions live. You have to know your business. You cannot outsource the knowledge of your business to anyone. You can outsource the grunt work, but not the knowledge. In fact, I would say 90% of respondents who cannot answer a basic question about their business do not get funding from the group of investors I typically associate with. Simple questions unanswered mean no investment. Before I go to the spreadsheet or go into questions, these are the 5 core steps we need to start with. We need to create assumptions around the revenue model. What are you selling? For how much? How often? And to whom? Ultimately, that's what business is all about, right? You have to have a product that you're selling or a service that you're selling. What will it then create? What will it then cost to create those products or services? How will you sell it? What will it cost to sell it? Item number 4, the heaviest expense in your business is still item number 4. People cost money, but don't go too early on that, because the mistake that many can make in outlining people expenses first is overestimating early. You need to know what you need to sell, through whom, and for how much before you start building a big team. In this particular place, to young companies, my other advice would be, don't overinflate your titles. It's easy for there to be a CEO for a 0-day-old company. But there's no need for there to be COOC, TOC, FOC, MOC, XO. You just need somebody whose neck can be grabbed and run. That's the secret. Others, you don't need inflated titles. Partly because as you grow the company, you're actually going to need those titles higher. And if the less deserving person already has the title, it's going to be incredibly hard to replace that. What were you saying, Steve? No. I heard your voice, so I thought maybe you said something. And then general expenses, which, again, for young companies, general and operating expenses are probably the smallest, but they still should be in the financial model. I think I've covered all except one. In that financial model, in the first few revenue assumptions, you're going to need to know who your first customer is, who your second customer is, because you need to target at that point. The first, second, fifth customers are incredibly important. The business I'm talking about, within the confines of a global company, we know our first 3 customers. The company itself has 33 million customers around the globe. But for this new business, we've identified 3 that we need to target first. It's important to know who you're going to sell to first. And that who you're going to sell to is not related to you. It's really easy to sell to your cousin, your uncle, your friend. The first unrelated customer is incredibly important, because that says you've thought through revenue all the way to the sales process. So this model will require Excel. I'm sorry, it has more complications in it than Google Sheets can handle. So the model will require Excel. The deck that I'm willing to share, it has some of these links for articles that will give you additional information. I'm happy to go into Excel and show you some of those pieces or answer specific questions as time permits. So floor is yours. Ask away. Steve.
I'm wondering, how do you differentiate between, for example, a marketplace business model versus, say, an e-commerce business model? Do you have differentiations?
To me, marketplaces and e-commerce are somewhat synonymous. I differentiate between SaaS versus product. Is that where you're going, or are you still thinking marketplace, like, so Amazon Marketplace versus a Shopify store? Which direction are you thinking?
Yeah, basically that, because I'm using one platform similar to what you guys use, and the difference with the marketplace is quite distinct to the e-commerce version that I'm looking at. So, but anyway, it might not be relevant.
Well, it could be. Not knowing some of the specifics, I'm having trouble tracking. But let me try and tell me if I'm off track. In an e-commerce model, you've got pretty clear operating expenses outlined. So if you sell for X, here are the A, B, C, D, and E costs that you are responsible for on a transaction, on a subscription, or even a contract basis. In a marketplace, virtually everything is a single transaction based. So it becomes a percentage rather than a series of expenses. Am I on the right track with it so far?
Yeah.
So yes, the model can differentiate between the two, because one is just an X% of sales, the other is articulated costs. The model does have place for things like managing inventory. What is the cost of storing inventory? What is the cost of shipping inventory? What is the cost of inventory that goes bad? So things like that are in there. Yes.
There are a lot of hats in this ecosystem, but how many deals do you do per year, or how many do you like to take a look at?
Well, by virtue of our application process, we look at anywhere from 100 to 200 deals a year. About, 20-ish will be brought in for presentation, and I'd say about a third of those, 5 to 6, receive investment. That's Plains Angels, but our group, Plains Angels, does belong to something broader called the Midwest Angel Syndicate. So angel groups from 6 states share deal flow. So if Plains Angels is investing in somebody, I will share what we are investing in our due diligence stocks with the others on that list. Once in a while, it picks somebody else's interest and they join along. So we've done some cross deals like that across the groups, but they tend to be few and far between. They really have to be of broad interest to become interesting, because each region has a different flavor, right? So the Minneapolis Angel Group tends to focus more on energy and healthcare. Nebraska has had more ag tech related investments than they did. So it depends on who we're talking. Yes.
You mentioned two writers to follow. What was Fred Wilson? Who was the other one?
Brad Feld. So Brad Feld is the guy who wrote a book called Venture Deals. It is as heavy as a textbook and as necessary as any book can be for the fundraising process. So this is what will, if you can spend the time to go through it once and go through some of the exercises, it'll prepare you for the first set of discussions with investors, with the attorney who's helping you through the papers. So I would, if I read this book, well, this is the way I read it. I read it cover to cover the first time. The second time, I started looking at surgical strikes, the chapter that I was most focused on. And then I've taken the online version of that course through Kaufman Foundation, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. Each time learning something new, because you end up in a group of other investors, other founders, others who bring a different perspective. And the exercises in that book will make you go through valuation, modeling, in a whole new different set of ways. It's a free course, so it pops up on Brad's blog every so often, and I think it's worth it. So yeah, it's probably the most dog-eared book on my shelf today on funding.
I would back that up.
If you haven't taken the course and do find access to it, take that course. It's called Venture Deals, and it's through Kaufman Fellows program.
It just started again,
Oh,
so
did
I
it?
have to wait till the next one. But yeah, I also took that with Mike and I did a team one time.
Would you agree with my
Oh,
assessment
yeah.
on homework?
Oh yeah, it's the most practical, with sessions, content that's actually being led by Brad and other folks behind Techstars and have gone on to raise their own funds. So it's all really tangible and I would say founder focused.
Thank you.
They tried to essentially, make public what was always so hard to understand about raising capital through that book.
Yeah, and in fact, Mike and I are going through the reading of a series of transaction documents for a startup we've been involved with, and he and I received about 250 pages yesterday that have to be affirmed, signed off by tomorrow afternoon. But we haven't had to call a lawyer
Yeah.
because of that book, we're able to go through and say, oh, these are the 5 or 6 or 10 places we need to be concerned about, and let's then just surgical strike on those with the right attorney rather than all 200 some pages. Other questions?
I don't know how much time we have left, but I'd be really interested to see you walk through a spreadsheet.
Sure, I can load that up.
Yeah, Ted, you have about 45 minutes.
Oh, wow.
We'll take it.
You were aware of that. But
You said 4 or 5?
45.
Why do I not have mine? Oh.
Let me, do you want to get, will you eventually hit mute too? Just so my email's not coming through. I was gonna, yeah, thanks.
That's a good one. So like this, this is the same, this part
All right, so when I was talking about assumptions, this particular spreadsheet, this is the simpler version of the model. This particular spreadsheet begins with some core assumptions. And those are the labels that will appear on the spreadsheet itself. So what will your revenue look like? Will it be the word revenue? Will it be the word sales? Will it be licenses? Things like that. So things that are closer and familiar to you become the labels that the spreadsheet should have. So again, just like if you were setting up a brand new accounting system, if you went into QuickBooks the very first time, QuickBooks asks you to set up the general ledger, right? What does the GL look like? That's what this is. In the model, what are your names for your products, for your services? So you don't have to spend too much time on this, but for the labels that matter, just update those. The company name, this is personal to you. Change that because ultimately one of these days you're going to be printing this model or sharing it with somebody else. When are you planning on beginning the business? Did it begin in the first month of 2022? Or shall we say that you're actually beginning it in April? What that did is it changed the month number for subsequent month. Simple stuff, right? This is really basic stuff. Here's what comes out then. Because people costs can be the biggest item, will you offer benefits to your employees? And if you will, what percentage of salary ends up being that benefit cost? Now, this changes so much by size of company, so much by the benefits you offer, that Mike and I didn't want to fix those costs. Health costs changed really, really rapidly. So what we did was we came up with a composite number that seemed to matter. 12% was a good number. In manufacturing, this number is going to be larger. In a heavily in a company heavily driven by contractors, so 1099s, this number might actually be zero, and that's okay. It's something that should be personal to you. You spend some time thinking about what set of benefits will you offer your employees. The next number, it shows 6%. It's actually 6.2 in the background. That's just FICA. FICA and Medicare are required expenses, so you're going to have that payroll tax cost. And what are you starting with? This is the $12,500 that Eric mentioned earlier. What do you have in the bank? And it might just be zero, but that's okay. If you're going to sell products online, what will be your credit card fees? Is it the PayPal 2.9 plus 30 cents, or is it the GoFundMe style fees, which could be 5 to 10 or 0 to 10, I should say. So building in some of those costs is important. This may appear unfamiliar, revenue recognition. Will you recognize your revenue immediately or as you earn it? So think about this. Let's say you sell a subscription to your platform. and your platform is a annual subscription fee of $500. If you recognize that revenue immediately, you earned $500 today. But in IRS's eyes, you actually earned a 12th of that 500 at the beginning of this month when you started providing that service. So how will you recognize that revenue matters. It affects your cash flow. You have cash in the bank, but you haven't earned it yet, so you shouldn't be spending it. So those kinds of numbers start in these assumptions. I'm a cheapskate, so I go to expenses first. And I started looking at, I'm going to zoom out. Some of these numbers are coming from other places, and some I'm entering right here. So payroll is coming from team. What does my team look like? So here's people. I have decided that I, as the CEO, am starting right away as a full-time person in the 6th month of the year, and my salary will be $24,000, and I'm guessing my raise percent will be 2.5. This way, you don't have to play with the model later and say, what if Sam started in the 7th month and somebody else started elsewhere? So you can sort of begin laying out when you're going to need what kind of people, full-timers, part-timers, salary, or just expenses. And then when I go back to expenses, I can see that, why do I have 3,500? One second, let me see. Oh yeah, because I have somebody in 3rd month or 22. Okay. So my payroll costs do begin to accumulate from this team. Benefits, payroll. So here's a direct expense. And how do you know direct expenses versus something that's coming from somewhere else? In this particular model spreadsheet, anything that's yellow highlight is places where you input data. So let's say you're going to buy a subscription to HubSpot. I don't know what HubSpot costs, but let's say it's that much. This is where you put that in, the monthly cost. What are you spending on Google Ads or Facebook Ads or whatever the case may be? And that way you start to build your sales and marketing, your product development expenses, and some of these other items that hit a new business in the beginning. Legal costs, banking costs, equipment, supplies, facilities, office space, stuff like that, all start to come in here. These are necessary so you can start planning whether your revenue that you're projecting is actually going to matter. So when that VentureNet panel or an investor group starts to look at these numbers, if they see that you're carrying inventory but you have no facility cost to store the inventory, they're going to know that your model isn't realistic yet. And this also is beginning to show your headcount growth in the company as you move in. So, Steve, your question on license, sales. What kind of sales are we undergoing? So, are they subscriptions? If they're subscriptions, and what kind of, so in this case, it's a 3-month subscription. What is the cost of acquisition for each of those subscription costs? Because there is a cost of acquiring that customer, right? So whether it's a fee you're paying to a sales or commission you're paying to a salesperson or known Google AdWords or Facebook ads, things like that. So you start building some of these things in here with different layers of subscriptions. So in my case, I'm currently building a subscription, which is an annualized subscription where I recognize revenue monthly, and I have a cost of acquisition that's commission-based. So that the model doesn't fit this spreadsheet. I just had to have a different spreadsheet altogether. And ultimately, what that does is it builds an overall revenue picture. How much are you receiving in revenue, in licenses, how much in non-licenses, like services, subscriptions, and what you pay for commission. So you start to see the picture outside of an accounting system. This is projection. You're not messing your accounting system up with fake data. You're playing in Excel. And that ultimately leads to your cash flow report. This is what cash looks like if my assumptions that I'm beginning to put in continue to come true. So what is my revenue? I started the company in May. What are my expenses? So this, you can see that even though I start the company in May, I started accruing expenses because of those early employees to help sell even prior to that. So that's what it looks like for overall cash flow. Let's just play a little bit. Let's just take the first few people's salaries back to March. Oops. Right there is a pretty dire state at the bottom line, right? If I hired all 6 of those people in March, I wouldn't have anything left, especially since I started with 25,000. Now, the business may require those 6 people to start in March. What that means is, before I hire those people, I need to have at least that many months worth of cash flow cash in the bank so that I can pay those individuals. So in some cases, you're going to make your hiring decisions differently based on your starting cash. Because not everything can be a promise to pay some. There are some things like salary that have an IRS link to it, especially taxes that have an IRS link to it. So that's where a spreadsheet like this can be beneficial. Now, you don't have to use this model. You can do this yourself in any particular spreadsheet. The point of this one is, it just gives you a starting point. It's a baseline. The spreadsheet I'm working through right now has 56 tabs at the bottom, and it doesn't fit on my 49-inch monitor. It's only because it's complex. It's taken several months to develop, but the complexity will determine what the data in there needs to look like. Ultimately, what you should do is build something, either using a template or your own. The only thing I would leave you with for the spreadsheet is, whatever you do, understand it fully. If you don't have an answer to a question, talk to somebody who can walk you through that scenario.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
So with row 67, change in cash. So
Yes.
right here, we're seeing basically outside of the investment in June, we're losing money. Now, if you were trying to raise money to get you to a point of profitability, are you basically then just trying to figure out what are the losses up to that point where the change in cash is positive? Is that like?
That's one way to look at it. Yeah. So you say, what do I need to start with, or when do I need an injection of cash so that my cash flow position never goes to negative?
And I probably should have asked this previously, but when it comes to financial models and raising money, things obviously go wrong.
Yes.
Unexpected things occur. In your opinion, whenever you get that number, so you add the change of cash, should you also be adding in a certain amount extra for those unexpected things, or like how does that look at? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. It depends on your relationship with your investors. So this should be as close to real as possible, especially as your relationship with your investors when your relationship is new. The surprises negative surprises can affect your relationship very, very negatively.
Oh, right.
So-
I just meant in the context of, I know that investors don't appreciate sometimes when you say, I need this much money to do X, Y, and Z, and then
Yeah.
I need more money because I didn't anticipate whatever happened.
Here's how my fellow group of investors thinks. Whatever a startup raises today is generally about 30% of what we're going to need to invest in them in the next 2 years. So we're keeping 70% as dry powder if we're managing that investment as a portfolio.
Can you say that one more time?
30-70. So whatever you're raising today is generally about 30% of what you're going to need from us in the next 2 years. I need to keep dry powder ready because there's a high likelihood that the assumptions you had in the models were wrong. And if you grow, I want to invest. If you don't grow, that 70% goes somewhere else.
On the employee part of this, you have different months where different employees might start, but that is also driven by assumptions, say based on growth or something. Should you capture a reason why you're making an additional hire at a certain point, or would you recommend building up a model that says, when we reach X amount of sales, add one more salesperson to the team kind of thing?
Yes, you should. That's generally not a function of the financial model, it's a function of your operating model for the company. So in my current world, it's called a human capacity plan. When do we start saying that at what point do we hire the next person?
Yeah.
So it's not when the first person has reached 100% capacity. It's generally somewhere in that 70 to 80% capacity when I need to start expanding the team. That's HCP. That question and your earlier question are both tied. When and should you build in fat into the model? Build it in when you know that your investors or your mentors expect. If they expect a realistic view, then don't build it. So in my case, my current set of stakeholders does not expect fat because they know that if there was trouble, they can inject people, money, whatever the resources are. So they need realistic. So I'm not building in any fudge into my model. It's just exact. And it's the same case with people.
So I'm sorry to go back to what you mentioned earlier, the 30-70 scenario. So if I'm asking you for, let's keep it simple, $30, you know ultimately you're going to give me 70 more. Is that the decision, you're basing your decision on giving me 100 or based on 30?
Based on my hope, my plan that you will be growing your business, and as you grow your business, you're going to need more capital. And if you've kept your promises for that 30, I'm willing to spend more because you've shown ability to keep that promise.
So the 70 would also come from you, not from revenue generating
Correct.
or other investors?
Correct. I'm hopeful that as you grow your business, I get to play with you,
Right.
not away from you.
And that other 70 would be a separate deal, another
Absolutely.
raise later, okay.
And I would just flip that to say, that's a question you want to ask any investor. Are you going to be setting aside capital to invest in our next round? Some do that, like Tasia's speaking to, and others don't, but it's a fair question to understand what their practice is, so that can you plan on them being there, or are you going to have to go out and find a whole bunch of additional investors?
Would you, to that point, would you forecast a future raise into this model?
Yes, yeah. You should say, here's why you would. Because you would have planned your growth. You would have planned the growth in customers and sales and people. So you know that if your model is right, cash flow becomes positive until a certain point when it becomes negative because of additional people, product, inventory, facilities, whatever. So then you start projecting that you're going to need to raise capital a month or 2 or 3 or 6 before. Yeah. Yes.
So when you're talking about assumptions versus facts, you don't really have to demonstrate that you've done your research and due diligence to kind of back up those assumptions.
I do generally have background material. The more background material you have, the better. But there's a high likelihood that at the earliest starting stages of the company, even the background material is likely to be guesses.
Yeah, okay.
Because ultimately with startups, you're generally entering a new market, a new solution, or a new product. So the assumptions are just guesses about what the future might look like.
So say, for example, it wouldn't be recommended to go out and try and get some type of a survey to see what interest there is and be able to provide that back.
You can, the surveys, as we all know, we participate in them. Surveys aren't reality, but they're directionally guides. Until that unrelated customer has written you that first check or processed the first transaction, nothing is real.
But the important thing is just, when we're questioning our assumptions, we need to be in the same account. We need to say, I thought, you know, where'd you get this number from? Oh, well, I'm thinking this based on some.
Sure. And some will cite research that the Big Four are doing. Some will cite psychology, human psychology, that in a pandemic X is going to happen. So whatever the source you're citing, just know it and then be able to support why you're saying that, not just regurgitating a set of numbers. So like the 30-70, there are fellow investors who say it's 20-80. There are others who do 50-50. It's a way of saying, how do we create our investment theme or investment policy, and then back.
Can I throw a little color on that?
Sure.
So from our perspective, if you think of the poker game I mentioned before, right? We put in the ante, we see the flop, and then the next card comes up. So we put in our early money. Like what we're looking for is, did you perform in that toward those first milestones the way you said you would? And then I'm going to bet more on you. I don't want you to have in your head, every time we invest, there's 70% in the bank account just waiting for the day you might need it to call us. Like that's not how it's not how we do it anyway. Like we're putting more money on the winners and like, oh, I fold, that's bad cards. I'm not in anymore, I'm out. So don't think of it that way. You still have to meet what he said. And it's really a related piece, I guess. You know, you have that curve, I picture a curve on your cash flow thing to this 30-70. Don't say, well, I'm aiming for 30% of it, so that's how much I need in my first round. That's not what we're doing here. Keep it in mind with what the milestone you want to reach is, so once you hit it with reasonable likelihood, you're going to go back to that investor and say, look what I did with that 30%. Like, I'm your winner, come on, let's go. Like, you have to be in a position to win when you've spent that money, hopefully. If you have to go back and say, I whiffed it, I'm way off, save me. Very not sexy. Sometimes we will, but like that's not the position you want to be in.
It's almost never, right? The save me is almost never.
Yes. I'll add to that too. One investment we just closed on 2 weeks ago was competitive in terms of we were evaluating a couple of different startups at seed stage. One was Bridge to A, focusing on the same problem in electrification, right, on the EV side. One of the key reasons we chose to go with the company we did invest in was not just because the founders had been successful before, because the others had as well. They had a really clearly defined and compelling view of what they were, not only what they were going to do with the seed phase, but the milestones they needed to meet in order to get to a higher valuation Series A. They based that partly on previous experience, but they were also basing it, just like Tej is saying, on showing us how and what they're going to allocate across the next 12 to 18 months. Right? And the final thing was, because we're kind of a hybrid measure studio, not just a fund, we also saw that we could lean in and help accelerate to that size, potentially help them get a higher valuation today, which makes everything happen. Being able to crisply and compellingly outline these are the actual milestones, not just here's the number of people. What is the result?
Will the terms change then? So if you've got this money sitting there, and say you give me the $30 that I referenced earlier, and I go out and I kill it, I exceed expectations, then I've got the leverage, and I know you've got that extra 70 sitting there. Then I'm dictating terms on a whole new level. But vice versa, if I blow it, then you're gonna say, well, Eric, I trust you, but I'm gonna give you a little bit of this, but the terms are now my favorite. I mean, is that the incentive in doing it that way?
There
Why
is-
do you give you a whole 100?
The relationship between a startup founder and their investor is very close to marriage, because it's going to be a long-lasting relationship.
Of course.
Except, just like with a prenup, you need to know what the exit conditions will be. You need to know, for example, if you know that your investor's fund is a 5-year fund, and you're killing it in that 4.5-year mark, chances are that investor is not writing you another check at the end of that fund. They're probably going to write it from a future fund that if they haven't raised yet, you don't have access to that capital. But let's say you're coming close to selling your company. The incentive for your investor to help you sell that company, because it actually creates a really positive return for that fund at that very late stage, is meaningful. It's material. So knowing that, keeping that line of communication open post-investment is really, really important. There are companies in our portfolio where that line was kept so well open that when trouble arose, every investor was right there. Whether or not they were writing the check, they were helping. The flip has also been true, where we didn't know, so we couldn't help, and we didn't help. The exit conditions, if you can keep the investor's exit conditions as a post-it on your side, it'll be helpful. Yes, sir.
Do you recommend a breakdown, let's just say at a high level, are you looking for a certain allocation of certain types of expenses to where, say, this percentage is going to go towards headcount and X percentage is going to go towards marketing, or is it just?
No. For a pure tech company, if I were to see 90% in product development and 10% in marketing, that's a hallucination. The number is generally 20. Product development is 20. It costs a lot to market a product. And then based on the industry, it's going to be different. Different by industry. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule that says X percent should always be here and Y percent should always be here.
What are your thoughts on founder pay? I noticed that when you pulled that up there, I think the founder was at 24K.
Because that's 24,000 too high for that stage. In all seriousness, like I said earlier, you got to live indoors, you got to have solid food. So it's got to come from somewhere. If you don't have family support, if you don't have somewhere else that capital is coming from, you can't make that model work. My first company, I couldn't afford to start because I didn't have capital. And I worked a full-time job, 40 hours at a corporation and 60 hours on the company. So it was a 100-hour week for close to 14 months. And the day, and my metric at that moment in time was, I will quit my job the day my revenue hits 1.5 times my then current salary. There is no rhyme or reason for that logic. It just was a metric. When I did my books in November of '94, at the end of the day on November 30th, my salary was $27,000 a year at that time, and my revenue was just over $40,000. December 1st, I quit. It had hit the metric. So that's what KPIs are all about, right? What is going to drive you to the next stage? Create that and then stay true to it. The salary paid for the food and mortgage.
I don't want to monopolize all the questions here, but if nobody else has one, I have one more. Generally speaking, you want your financial model to excite investors and have an up and to the right dynamic. But you also need to balance that with some level of reality. And do you have any thoughts on the best way to go about approaching that?
But should you have multiple models, perhaps like an aggressive approach where you're assuming that a lot, you're just, killing it, and then one where it's like you're sure that you're gonna.
For me, that doesn't work. For me, the realistic works better than aggressive or conservative. And I know full well that will be 20%, 30% on either side of that model. But one, because there's one faith system that you can follow. You can't follow multiple faith systems. If you follow too aggressive and you model too aggressive, but the market is conservative, the model is destined for failure. So go with what you can achieve, because achievement is what's going to keep your investors right beside you and new ones coming alongside you. That's my feeling. Hockey sticks rarely work. They work, but they rarely work.
So basically, don't overpromise.
Under promise, over deliver, not the other way around.
There was something that Eric said before that ties into what I said too, which is traction. Right? So, especially in independent sector, if you B2B SaaS, or B2B SaaS, B2B enterprise, right? And you're early stage, so you'd be interested in your early customers, right? And actually you want to talk to some of those early customers, especially in enterprise, to see engagement, to see any program to see business model.
So the instructions for this model are pretty basic. This is it. Anything that's in yellow, you're okay to edit. Anything that's white, it's locked. There's no password on the spreadsheet, so if you feel adventurous, go ahead and unprotect the sheet and change the formulas as you want to. Yes.
Okay, sorry. My question is very simple. I just recently joined a new program they call Unanswered about the fundraising, and one of the members just raising $1 million, but he don't have a business, but he just raised the money based on the assumption and the model. But my question is, how the investor evaluate that kind of a situation?
One of two or three ways. The first could be that investor knew the person who raised the money and their successful track record before. So let's say the person the founder, had one or two successes before. So the investors knew that they know how to execute whatever the model, whatever the company, whatever the business. That's one. The other, on Tuesday I was flying back from Salt Lake City to Des Moines. The connection was in Vegas. There were lots of people doing that also works. Gambling does work. It does pay sometimes. And many investors will gamble. There are funds that will purely distribute the same amount of money to almost every deal that comes up, knowing that out of every 100, 85 will fail, 10 will probably return capital, the 5 will make the ultimate money. Gambling works too.
The higher appetite for gambling on coasts is what I've been told.
No, I think there's a higher number of startups pitching on the coast. There are gamblers amongst us. There's more due diligence in our communities. I will say that. There is more scrutiny of models. There's more scrutiny of financials. There's more scrutiny of delivery. We just don't have as many companies pitching to us as some of the larger communities do. I think from the data I've seen in the past, the percentage of companies that get funded versus pitched is about the same. The number of companies that get funded is smaller here, because our N is smaller, so our subset of N is smaller. All right, well, thank you all for listening. Page@plainsangels.com. I'm happy to send this spreadsheet, the attachments, as you need. And good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you.